teachers gathered around their professor of defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin called out, gather round everyone, do not be afraid." Next to the professor was a large, dark wardrobe. As Professor Lupin moved closer to the wardrobe, it gave a sudden wobble. "Nothing to worry about," said Professor Lupin calmly, as a few people jumped back in alarm. Someone called out fearfully, "There's a Bogart in there!" Most of the students seemed to feel that this was something to worry about. One gave Professor Lupin a look of pure terror. The students eyed the now rattling doorknob apprehensively. Professor Lupin offered, "Bogarts like dark and closed spaces, wardrobes, the gap beneath beds, the cupboards under sinks. I once met one that had lodged itself into a grandfather clock. This one moved in yesterday, and I asked the headmaster if the staff would leave the Bogart in the wardrobe so that my third graders could have some practice." Professor Lupin continued, "So the first question we must ask ourselves is, what is a Bogart?" Hermione put her hand up. "It's a shapeshifter," she said. "It can take the shape of whatever it thinks that will frighten us most." Couldn't have put it better myself," said Professor Lupin. "So the Bogart sitting in the darkness within has not yet assumed a form. It does not yet know what will frighten the people outside of the door. Nobody knows what a Bogart looks like when he is alone, but when I let him out, he will immediately become whatever each one of us fears." Professor Lupin continued, "This means that we have a huge advantage over the Bogart before we even begin. Does anyone know why this is?" he asked. Someone offered, "Because there are so many of us, it won't know what shape to take." "Precisely," said Professor Lupin. "It's always best to have company when you're dealing with a Bogart. He becomes confused. Which should he become, a headless corpse or a flesh-eating slug? Once I saw a Bogart make this very mistake. It tried to frighten two people at once and turned himself into half a slug. Not even remotely frightening." The charm that repels a Bogart is simple, yet it requires a force of mind. You see, the thing that really finishes a Bogart is laughter. What you need to do is force it to assume a shape that you find amusing. We will practice the charm without wands first. After me, please. Ridiculous. "Ridiculous," said the class together. "Good," said Professor Lupin, "very good. But that was the easy part, I'm afraid. You see, the word alone is not enough." Professor Lupin opened the wardrobe, and one by one the students approached the Bogarts. One by one they faced their worst fears and then cast the ridiculous spell, turning the Bogart into some very silly shapes. Ron Weasley, terrified of spiders, imagined a spider on roller skates, 8 legs going every which way. Neville Longbottom imagined Professor Snape in his grandmother's extravagant hat, and on it went until Professor Lupin jumped in front of the line and turned a full moon into a punctured white balloon and forced the Bogart back into the wardrobe. I imagine that many of you recognize that this scene is from J.K. Rowling in her book Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Rowling offers 2 lessons on how to be courageous in the face of fear. She suggests facing fear with others and proposes that we transform fear through laughter. The non-academic, crowdsourced Wikipedia tells us that courage is the choice and willingness to confront agony, pain, danger, uncertainty, or intimidation. Wikipedia makes a distinction between physical and moral courage. The authors write, "Physical courage is bravery in the face of physical pain, hardship, death, or threat of death, while moral courage is the ability to act rightly in the face of popular opposition, shame, scandal, discouragement, or personal loss." The Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Galen Gungerich, expands upon this definition of courage. He begins, The English word courage derives from the French word, which means heart. He says this is a useful etymology. The work of the heart is not to pump a vast amount of blood in one instant and then rest for a season. Rather, the heart works best when its rhythm is steady and its beat is unrelenting. Gungerich continues, courage is like that too. There is a cadence to courage, a march toward achieving what is good and confronting what is not. Courage does not eliminate fear. It sees a path through fear. It sees to the calling that lies beyond. It's the wisdom to know which direction to go and the willingness to move in that direction. And then he concludes, whatever your fear, have courage. Face the direction you must go, and then take the first step, or turn the first wheel, and then keep moving. We live in a time when we need to be courageous, both in our private lives or in the public sphere. We may have an unexpected change in our living situation. The landlord sells our house. A housemate moves out. Climate change causes a catastrophic event, a flood, a fire, leaving you or your family without your home. We may lose our health or our job. A parent moves into assisted living. Facing these changes requires courage. In the public sphere, courage is needed as our rights that we worked hard for are quietly dismantled in the court system. Hate crimes have picked up. Our neighbors are at risk. We are in a time when we need to be ready to be courageous. There's a story which comes out of Nazi Germany. I don't know if it's true or not. It is the story of a train full of people traveling somewhere. The train stops. The military boards the train and begins to check people's paperwork. As two officers work their way through one of the cars, a man leaps out of his seat, yelling at the woman beside him. "What do you mean you don't have your papers? How could you have forgotten them? I specifically told you not to forget them this morning before we left." He goes on, calling her a bunch of derogatory words. As the officers approach the man turns to them, yelling about how his wife has forgotten her papers. The officers, not wanting to get into the middle of what appears to be a domestic fight, move on without asking the woman for her papers. They do not remove her from the train. After the officers leave the train car, we, the listeners, learn that the man does not know the woman. She is Jewish. He made a big scene at great risk to himself, pretending to be her angry husband in order to save her. I don't remember where I first heard this story, but I heard it years ago, long before this country began to tilt towards fascism. This story is a reminder that individuals, like all of you and me, moving through our lives, have the inner resources to sometimes be courageous and aim toward what is morally right and good, even when we are filled with fear. We can become more courageous as we review the times in our lives when we overcame fear. We can learn from our past experiences in preparation for the future. I invite you to think of a situation that you've had as an adult when you felt afraid, yet chose to face your fear. What did you observe? What did you think? What did you feel at the time? What did you or the people around you say, think, or do to help you face that fear? At what point did your fear start to go down? How did you feel afterwards? And now think back on a situation that you feared in a time in your childhood in which you faced fear. How was it the same or different? now think of a situation that you are currently facing that creates fear or anxiety. What are you most afraid of? Is there a way to apply the same skills you used in the other two situations to be more courageous in this situation? Remind yourself that you have the skills and have used them successfully in the past. What mental or environmental barriers stand in the way of using these skills? How can you cope with and get rid of these barriers? If you are having a hard time with this task, maybe think about a time when you and a friend helped each other through a fearful time. Or think about a situation where you might be able to use the ridiculous spell and laugh your way into courage. Or maybe you can find your inner well of courage with a simple prayer, such as, "May I be like the man in the train. May I be like the man in the train." The world needs courageous people, willing to speak out even if their voice is shaky, willing to move forward when their knees or hands are shaky. The world needs people to resist what is wrong and strive for what is right and good. It takes each one of us at different times to be courageous. May each one of us find the force of mind to imagine a terrifying spider wearing roller skates, legs going every which way. May it be so.